Before I introduce Dr. Katharine Hayoe, I want to take a minute to share why we at Project Peace also believe this conversation is so important. At Project Peace, we work to strengthen our communities through volunteerism and by hosting educational events like this one. Opportunities to deepen our understanding of justice and the most pressing issues of our time. We believe that we are all called to grow in awareness, compassion, and action as we seek the flourishing of our neighbors and communities here in the East Bay. We know that the negative effects of climate change and poor stewardship of creation are most deeply felt by those who are already vulnerable, which is why we see today's conversation as essential to loving our neighbors well. So whether you're passionate about creation care and climate change, are confused by the science, or are simply curious, this conversation today is for you. It is a true honor to welcome Dr. Katharine Hayoe as part of our ongoing speaker series. Katharine is an atmospheric scientist whose research focuses on understanding how climate change affects people and the planet. She serves as a chief scientist for the Nature Conservancy and holds a distinguished professorship and endowed chair at Texas Tech University. Her work has earned global recognition, including being named one of Time's 100 most influential people and a United Nations champion of the earth. She brings not only scientific expertise, but a deep commitment to making the realities of climate change accessible, relevant, and actionable. Please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Katharine Hayoe.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here. This is being recorded and live streamed, so there's people listening online and you can share this afterwards. We are going to be very high tech tonight. So if you can, go ahead and take out your phone. If you haven't turned off your ringer, now's a good time to do that. And take a picture of this QR code. When you open up your camera, you should see a little yellow link that you can click. And it will take you directly to the way that we can interact tonight. Now, if you don't want to, or if you can't take a picture, you can type it in. The address is pollev.com/Katharine. But if you type it in, you have to spell Katharine right. And I can tell you from sad experience that your phone doesn't like to spell Katharine with 2 A's. My phone still doesn't like to spell Katharine with 2 A's. So I do recommend the QR code if you can. And when you get there, I see a few people are still taking the pictures. You can do this if you're watching the live stream also. You don't have to be here in person. The live stream works too. I just wanted to ask you about Project Peace. Is this the first time you've attended a Project Peace event, or have you attended a few of them, or do you go to a lot of them, or are you actually part of this organization? What's your relationship with Project Peace? Now, let's see, is this working? Because it looks to me like it's not really working, is it? Let me see. There we go. Oh, it looks like this is not. There we go. Now it's working. Okay, perfect. Sometimes you just have to push the button again, right? Technology. Okay, this is good. So a lot of people, this is their first event. 70, 75, yeah. And is there going to be information, ways for people to find out more about Project Peace? Okay. QR codes out in the patio. So we're doing QR codes all night here. So now you know how this works. So there's going to be QR codes out on the patio, because I looked at some of the former speakers they had in the former events, and if I was here, I would have been going to those events too. So this is definitely something you want to be in on, because the discussions they're having are really, really relevant and really rich and really deep with excellent speakers. Okay, so now I want to ask you a harder question. And the next question I'm going to ask you, you have to answer with a word. Just one word. Any word, you can pick the word, but only one word. And the next question is, when I say climate change, how do you feel? Yeah. Worried. Exactly. Worried? Let's see, is this working, or do I have to hit that button again? Ugh, what is going on with this? Let's see. Okay, yes, that worked. When you open your phone to your news feed, or when you hear that a new study just came out, or when somebody says something about climate change, how do you feel? We've already got and worried, and those are definitely yes. Now you see, why did I say one word? It's because the more people pick a word, the bigger the word. This is a wordle. So several of you have picked anxious, concerned, worried, frustrated, confused, scared, upset, depressed, disturbed, panicked, urgent, helpless, overwhelmed. The first time I ever asked this question was after I had just written my book, Saving Us, and it came out during the pandemic. And so my first event was obviously on Zoom. It was to a group of parents at a science museum in Moab, Utah. And I had written this book because for several years, the number one question I was getting, no matter who I spoke to, it could be fellow climate scientists, it could be students, it could be healthcare professionals, architects, botanical artists, Catholic nuns. Whoever I spoke to, I was getting the same question from everyone, which is, where do you find hope? Or the flip side, are we screwed? And so I wrote this whole book, Saving Us, and then, at the last minute, you're like, well, what if it's irrelevant to what people care about? So I was speaking to this museum in Utah, and I said, let me just ask you, how do you feel? And I actually should have taken a screenshot of that and showed it to you, because I don't think that you could tell the difference between your answers and theirs. And since then, I have gone on to ask tens of thousands of people this question. And no matter who I'm asking, I'm a scientist and this is data, so I've analyzed it. No matter who I'm asking, the responses I get are between 90 to 95% negative. There's always about 5% that are neutral or even positive, which is great. But 90 to 95% of the responses I get are negative, and that includes working with people who are, or speaking with people who are working for the World Bank, alleviating poverty around the world. Working for people who do climate adaptation and resilience for cities. Working for people who are in clean energy startups. Working for organizations like my own, the Nature Conservancy, that invest in nature-based solutions. All of us around the world, this is the way we feel. Not just in the US, not just in North America, around the world, this is how we feel. And so I made an educated guess tonight that this is what you would say. And I structured my whole presentation around this. It was a gamble, but I figured it was a pretty safe one, statistically speaking. So I have 4 things I want to share with you if you are one of the 95% of people who said anxious, distressed, worried, or paralyzed. And the first thing you need to know, this is a really important one, is you are not alone. So we often think that me and those other people I know were worried, but most of those other people who don't want to talk about it, they're not worried. But if we look at the data, in fact, the vast majority of people are worried. And of the people who claim they're not worried, at least half of them are just saying they're not worried as a defense mechanism. But what we have is a large group of worried people, most of whom are not activated. And this is really important, because if we assume the world looks like this, what do we need to do? We need to make people worried, right? But if we know based on data that the world looks like this, what do we need to do? Exactly. And how do you activate worried people? Do you activate them by telling them that humans will go extinct if they don't do something about it? That's going to make us even more worried, because how am I supposed to prevent that? It's a very different conversation we're having depending on whether we think the world looks like this or this. So that's what I want to talk about today. So first of all, where is the data? Well, let's look at where we are right here. It turns out that 78% of people in this county are worried about climate change. 78%. What about across the United States? Across the United States, 64% are worried. Would you have thought that? I bet not. What about around the world? Now, this is a little bit different. Here, the dividing line between orange and blue is 50%. So anywhere that's orange is more than 50%. Here around the world, the dividing line is at 60%. So any country that is pink is more than 60%, and the darker red it is, the more people are worried. And so you can see in just about all of Latin America, it's over 80%. India is over 80%. Half of Europe is over 80%. The gray areas weren't surveyed. And the countries that are less than 60% are countries where people don't even know if they'll wake up and be able to have a safe place to live or feed their kids tomorrow in many of those countries. So if you're worried, you are not alone. And that's something really important to know. Because when we're worried often, we don't talk about it, and then we feel like, well, I'm the only one who feels that way. And then the second thing you need to know, which is equally important, is if you're worried, you are not too sensitive, you are not overreacting, you actually understand what's going on and you are having a rational response to what's happening. If you are not worried about what's happening, that is an irrational response. So if you're worried, that is exactly the emotion that a normal, rational person would have when they found out what was happening. What is happening? Well, to explain it very simply in 60 seconds using a cartoon, our planet has a natural blanket of heat-trapping gases. The sun's energy shines down and goes through this blanket like a window. The Earth absorbs the sun's energy and gives off heat, which gets trapped by this blanket, just like a blanket traps your body heat on a cold night. This natural blanket keeps our Earth the perfect temperature for life. Without it, we'd be a frozen ball of ice. So if this is natural, which it is, if it's good, which it definitely is, what's the problem? The problem is that by digging up and burning coal and gas and oil, we are producing more and more heat-trapping gases that are wrapping an extra blanket around the planet, causing it to warm. It's like someone snuck into your room at night and they put an extra heavy blanket over you. What happens? You wake up sweating, right? You're like, I didn't need this blanket. That's what we're doing to our planet. Since the dawn of the industrial era, we have been digging up and burning massive amounts of coal, gas, and oil. That's about 3/4 of the problem. The remaining quarter of the problem is large-scale deforestation and industrial agriculture. And as a result, it is no exaggeration to say, and this is literally a quote from a scientific paper I published, that we are conducting an unprecedented experiment with the only home we have. Shouldn't we be worried about that? Yes. When we look at the data, we can see that it's warming faster than any time in human history. And just like Goldilocks, we don't like it too cold, we don't like it too warm, we like it just right. We often refer to this issue as global warming because we scientists use the average temperature of the planet to measure how quickly it's changing, but I often call it global weirding. Because wherever we look, the weather's getting weirder. In fact, about 10 years ago, I was waiting in line at Sunday school to pick up my son. Sunday school was going a bit late. And the man in front of me said, "Do you mind if I ask you a question?" I said, "Well, sure. It's not like we're going anywhere. We're just waiting." He said, "Do you feel like the weather here in West Texas has gotten weirder?" And I thought about it. I thought, well, yes, our heat waves are more intense, our droughts are stronger, our heavy rainfall is dumping even more rain. Yeah, the weather is getting weirder. And he said, "I knew it." He said, "I've lived here for 30 years and I could tell something was wrong." So what's happening is, it's like wherever we live, we have this set of weather dice. And if we live in Texas or California, we already have 3 6s on our weather dice. You know what I mean? The 6s are the heat waves, droughts, wildfires, storms. But as the world gets warmer decade by decade, it's like it's sneaking in and taking another of those numbers and replacing it with another 6, or another, or even a 7. And so you might say, well, we just had the wildfire of record. How could we have another one? Or we just had a 500-year storm. How can we have another 500-year storm the very next day? It's because climate change is loading the weather dice against us. So we're seeing these extreme events that have always happened in history. We're seeing them getting more intense, more dangerous, bigger and stronger. And we see this in our headlines all the time, right? Here in California, atmospheric rivers are getting stronger and more intense. The rainfall they dump is getting worse. Wildfires are burning greater area. Droughts are getting stronger and longer. We're seeing these changes everywhere we live. A survey last year asked Americans, have you been affected by extremely hot weather? 74% of people said yes. Have you been affected by severe winter storms, major droughts, hurricanes, flooding, wildfires, tornadoes, other severe weather events? All told, 9 out of 10 Americans had already been personally affected, and this was from a year and a half ago. Back in the 1980s, in the US, there was $1 billion weather and climate disaster on average every 4 months. So that's about 3 a year. Accounting for how the value of the dollar changed over time, of course. By the 2010s, there was one every 3 weeks, and there was one every 2 weeks now. So if you feel like you're just opening the newspaper or turning on the TV or looking at your news feed and there's another disaster, you're right. They're a lot more frequent than they used to be. And why does this matter? You know why it matters. It matters because these disasters affect the air that we breathe. They're affecting the water we drink, the food that we eat, the buildings and the roads and the systems we use that were built for a planet that doesn't exist anymore. They're affecting the nature that surrounds us, not just on land, as we often think about it, but in the ocean as well, where most of our oxygen comes from. Where most people, especially in low-income countries, depend on the ocean as the primary source of their protein. People often talk about saving the planet, but I say it's not about saving the planet. The planet will be orbiting the sun long after we're gone. It's about saving us. And I put an asterisk on us because people often think I just mean humans. Let me be clear. If all of nature other than humans disappeared off the face of the earth, how long would we last? Yeah, 2 weeks. That's a little optimistic, actually. I bet it would be less. We depend on nature. The breath you just took, that oxygen came from plants or kelp or phytoplankton. The water we drink, the food we eat, everything we have depends on this planet. It isn't about saving the planet itself. It is literally about saving us and every other living thing on which our own life depends. Now, this is true for all of us. If we're a human being living on planet Earth, we have every reason we need to care. But we are not all affected equally. So I was a student studying astronomy and physics, actually. That's what my undergraduate degree is in, when I took a class on climate change. And I learned that climate change was no longer a future issue. It was already affecting us today. I learned that the skills I had learned in physics and astronomy were the same skill set you need to understand the physics of our planet. But what completely changed the trajectory of my whole life was when I found out that climate change affects us all, but it doesn't affect us equally. So originally, the biggest differences were between countries. Poor countries produce less emissions, rich countries produce more. But as the world has become more globalized, the biggest differences now are within a given country, not between countries. It's between the people who are rich and the people who are poor in a given country. And at the global scale, the richest 1% in the world are responsible for 15% of emissions. That is twice the emissions of the poorest 50%. Think about that. Half the people in the world, half of them, produce half the emissions of the richest 1%. That's why climate change is an issue of justice and equality. Who bears the brunt of the impacts? I'm sorry, this figure is very difficult to read, so I will read it to you. You will get the point, though. The red is lower income countries. The blue is higher income countries. How many people per thousand are affected every year by these increasing climate-fueled droughts, crop failures, floods, storms, and more? The poorest countries in the world are most impacted, yet they've done the least to contribute to the problem. And in some countries like Malawi, they have actually seen an uptick in illegal child marriages because families cannot feed their children. And they've looked for what the signal is, and the youth workers say it's got to be climate change because there's nothing else driving this trend. If we look at a map of the world of who's most vulnerable, you can see it is once again the people who've done the least to contribute to the problem. So we get floods here, and then they get floods in Bangladesh that cover a third of the entire country. We get hurricanes here, and the same hurricane hits Haiti, which already had cholera in its water supply, and kicks off a massive epidemic that kills tens of thousands of people because the water system got overwhelmed. We have droughts where I live in Texas. The exact same drought in Syria massively exacerbated the refugee crises. And we're even able to do what we call attribution now, where we actually say, with or without climate change, what would this drought look like? And the current drought in Syria and Iraq over the last 2 years, with no change in climate, would have been normal conditions. With the warming we've seen today, it is an extreme drought, and if we continue along this path, it would be an exceptional drought. Research done right here at Berkeley showed that climate change has already increased the economic gap between the richest and poorest countries in the world by 25%. That's already happened. But that's not the only type of inequities. There's intergenerational inequity, where the people who are just now being born will bear the brunt of the impacts of decisions that they did not make. And then I mentioned that most of the inequality today is not even between countries, but rather in our own countries and even in our own cities. This is an analysis showing, for example, how the poorer the neighborhood, the hotter it is during heat waves. Poorer neighborhoods can be up to 15 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than a wealthier neighborhood in the same city, such as Oakland. Why? Racist redlining practices led to no green space, no trees, no parks, nothing to keep those areas cool when the heat strikes. And as a result, analyses that we've done at the Nature Conservancy shows that around the country, tens of thousands of hospital visits and hundreds of deaths occur that are completely preventable if we just incorporated nature into our neighborhoods, especially low-income neighborhoods. And it doesn't just fall out along socioeconomic lines, it also falls out very much along racial lines as well. Who is most vulnerable? Who gets the recovery efforts first? Who can only afford to live in places where they're the ones first hit by storms, floods, and more? Climate change affects us all, but it doesn't affect us equally, and it's not fair. So if you're worried, if you're anxious, you're not alone. This is a rational response. And worry is good if we know what to do, right? I mean, if there's a problem and you're not worried about it, do you want to fix it? No, right? You need to be worried in order to want to fix something. But you have to know what to do, and here's the problem. Most people don't. Most people do not know what to do. So, just a reminder, we have a small group who claim they're not worried, about half of whom are worried. Their defense mechanism is to say they aren't. Then we have a big group who are worried, and we only have a tiny group who are activated. In fact, in the US, as of last year, you know how big that green group is? 8%. Yeah, 8%. So how do we address that? Well, unfortunately, Every day, I hear from people saying, we just have to scare people more. And our brains, to a certain extent, like being scared. Because research has shown, and this is a study with 250 plus authors from 64 countries around the world, 63. So this is not a US specific phenomena, this is humans. They have found around the world that doom and gloom messaging, the starving polar bear on the melting ice sheet, the ocean circulation shutting down, it's very highly effective to get people to share information like posting on the internet or on social media where negativity reigns. So what is worry good for? It's good for sharing information, getting the word out. But they went on. However, doom and gloom messaging was, I bolded these words, the absolute worst for motivating action. Now let's just stop here for a second. Again, remember those yellow, blue, green areas? What is our goal? Is our goal to make worried people more worried or to make worried people activated? Thank you. If it's to make worried people activated, what does this tell us? Doom and gloom was the absolute worst for making people activated. And it was among the worst for changing climate change beliefs or support for climate policies. In fact, it gets worse. Negative emotions backfired, making people less likely to take action the more worried they were. Isn't this mind-blowing? So climate changes and we get worried, and what most of us tend to do is we tend to load up our wheelbarrow of totally true, scary facts and dump it on people. And then we are shocked when nothing happens and we can't understand why. There's an excellent book called The Influential Mind written by a neuroscientist, and this is a quote from this book, and this book is not about climate change. It's just about the brain. In it, she says, fear and anxiety cause us to withdraw, to freeze, to give up rather than take action. That's just the human brain. Isn't that exactly what's happening with people in climate change today? And so climate just changes more. So I want to give you a real life example from Canada. If you haven't picked up the fact that I'm Canadian, I'll say about a few more times. This is a real life example of this actually happening in Canada. So this is showing from March 2019 all the way to September 2024, people who say that environment is a top issue facing Canada, and they include climate change and things like that. Does anybody remember what happened in the summer of 2023 in Canada? Wildfires. Devastating wildfires. Now, if disasters cause people to prioritize climate action, what would you expect to happen to people's levels of concern after the wildfires? You expect it to go up like this, right? What actually happened from 2023 till today? It went down. Why? Well, how am I supposed to stop the wildfires, right? And so if you go back to that study that I just showed, remember it said too much doom and gloom actually causes people to dissociate and be less likely to take action. And so we just had an election, you might know. And before the election, everybody does a lot of polling. And one of the things they said is, how do you feel about climate change? And most people said, I prioritize immediate concerns about the cost of living and housing over climate change. What do you think is driving skyrocketing insurance rates? Climate change. Some people aren't making that connection. And they say, well, I prioritize it, but I need to focus on other things right now. And they went on, and forgive this very horrible plot, I didn't make it, but I did put the labels on it to show you what this says. They asked people, are you willing to do something about climate change? And then they asked people, do you think what you do will make a difference? And there was an almost linear relationship showing that people are willing to do something if they think it makes a difference. I mean, pretty obvious, right? But we just haven't put the pieces together. So what is the missing piece in catalyzing action? It's knowing what to do. And right now, most people don't know what to do. We don't understand why it matters to our lives until it's too late, and we don't know what we can do to fix it. So the first one, what I think of as the distance between the head to the heart, is called psychological distance. And when we humans are facing a risk that we don't know what to do with, we tend to push it away. Oh, it'll matter in the future, not now. Or it happens to those people over here, but not me. And when we look at climate change, we see every one of these types of psychological distance in play. So going back to these maps from the Yale program on climate change communication, is global warming happening? Most people say yes. Will it harm plants and animals? Yes. Where's the psychological distance here? These are non-human species. How about people in the future? Where's the distance here? In time, right? Yeah, it'll affect people in the future. How about people who live over there? Yeah, it'll affect people who live over there. Now, do you think it'll affect you? Yeah. This is the head-to-heart distance. People have not made the connection. Now, you might say again, is this just the US? What do you think? Do you think it's just the US? No, this is humans. Oh, I forgot I had Alameda County here too. It is yellow, but barely yellow. I mean, given that it's home to UC Berkeley, given it's home to so many climate action groups, only 58% of people think it will affect them personally, even though almost everyone has been impacted by wildfires, by atmospheric rivers, by floods, and more. So here's the global map I showed you before. Are you worried about climate change? And then this map is, will it harm future generations? So you see it's gotten a little bit bluer, but it's still pretty pink. And then, will it affect me? Yeah. So here's our first lesson. When we talk about climate change, how do we need to talk about it? We need to talk about what's happening now and here in ways that are relevant and concrete. Not the future, not over there, and not things that are not relevant to our lives. But we also need to talk about what? What I think of as the hands, what we can do about it. Because currently in the United States, over 50% of people feel helpless when they think about climate change. Over 50% don't know where to start when it comes to climate action. And when you ask people what's the most important thing you can do about climate change, most people say recycle. And don't get me wrong, I recycle with the best of them. But I know, first of all, that most of what I recycle doesn't even get recycled. And I also know that it doesn't really help with climate change. If we do it right, it will help with waste. And then I was on one of my bundled trips in East Asia this fall, and I was in Singapore when a big new study came out of what do people in Singapore think about climate change. And I was fascinated. So I was speaking at the university that day, so I got the report and I started reading it, and I was like, most people are worried, most people don't understand why it affects them, nobody knows what to do, and they think they need to recycle. That's the other side of the world. We are all in this boat together. So how do we tackle the head-to-heart gap, psychological distance, and how do we build a sense of, if I do something, it'll make a difference, efficacy? Well, it turns out I didn't finish with these maps. I have a few more maps to show you. There is something we're not doing that is so simple that we just skip right over it. It is so simple, it's hard to believe. It's so simple. It reminds me of, Jesus in the Gospels telling his disciples that the little children could understand things more easily than they could. Because sometimes when something is too simple, we think it can't be that simple. So we left off at this map. Do you think global warming will harm you personally? But there is a darker blue map. And that darker blue map is, do you ever talk about it even once in a while? Not good. Slightly better, 55% of this county, but still not great. Now, this is not every day. This is not every week. This is once in a while. Like maybe once in the last 6 months. What about around the world? Well, around the world, here we are back again to worried about climate change. And then do you hear anybody talk about it? Now, this is a very interesting map, though, because I don't have any evidence, but I strongly suspect you can see the influence of a single human being on this map. Yeah. It was 5.5 years ago that a young woman took a piece of white cardboard and wrote "School Strike for Climate" on that piece of white cardboard, and she went and sat outside a building, and that building was the Swedish Parliament. Her name was Greta, and I strongly suspect that she is behind the pink colors in Northern Europe. Isn't that interesting? So it shows us that one person's conversation can really make a difference. Because think about it. If you don't talk about it, why would you care? And if you don't care, why would you do anything about it? We are social creatures. What we converse about and share about communicates what matters to us and what doesn't matter. And if, like during the last presidential election, nobody even mentions climate change, they are basically communicating that it doesn't matter. And that is a bigger problem than do you think it's real? We're obsessed with the people who think it isn't real. You know how many people would think it isn't real? 10%. Do you know how many people think it's real but it doesn't matter to them? Most of the country. So how do we break this climate silence? We talk about it. And this is very directly relevant to churches too. So just last month, a new study came out showing that over 90% of Christian religious leaders, pastors, ministers, and more accept the reality of a changing climate, but have never mentioned it. Yeah. And it gets, I'm not pointing any fingers. You clearly have. You're in the minority on this survey. It gets worse or better depending on how you think of it. I like to think of it as better. The researchers also found that, it wasn't over 90, it was nearly 90. Nearly 90% agree with the science, and when churchgoers learn how widespread this is, they want to do something about it. So the simple act of saying all of the pastors and ministers and church leaders agree makes people in churches say, oh, well, maybe we should do something about it. But how would they know they don't agree if nobody ever talks about it? You see, this is so simple. It's so simple that we think it can't possibly be that easy. I'm not saying that these conversations are easy, though, but they're necessary. They're like the first step. It's like if you think of a row of dominoes leading to a better future, the first domino is to just have a conversation about it. And we're just skipping the first domino. What's the easiest way to knock over a row of dominoes? To knock over the first one, isn't it? We're just missing that key step. Okay, so just to make sure you're still with me, get your phones back out again. If you need the QR code, it's up there, but it's the same QR code you had before. And I want to hear from you, and let me go back and forth to make sure it's actually going to load. I want to hear from you. I'd like to give it a try, having a conversation, but my friends aren't interested or they won't listen. I don't want to start an argument. My uncle's a tough sell. It's too depressing. I don't know what to say, and nothing. I'm ready to go. Congratulations. You all can leave. No, just kidding. I've got a little bit more for you. And then we are doing questions after too. Okay, awesome. You're moving. This is serious. We're up to 46, 45%. Almost half of you are ready to go, which is awesome. And then 22, 24% don't know what to say. And then we've got a couple, friends aren't interested, don't want to start an argument. Okay. Give you a chance. Moving around a little bit. Okay, I think we're locked in. All right, good. So if you chose any of the but options, here's what you need to know. We all like to talk about things we're interested in. So I was speaking at a scientific organization in DC a few years ago, and a NASA postdoc came up to me afterwards, and he said, I study climate change, I'm really worried about it, but I don't know how to talk about it with my friends. So I said, well, what do you do with your friends? And he said, well, we cook together. We all come from different countries, and we cook together. I was like, well, you could talk about how climate change is affecting food in every country. He was like, of course. It's that simple. What are we interested in? That's where we need to be having the conversation. If you don't want to argue with somebody, that's totally fine. I don't like arguing too. And frankly, arguing doesn't change minds. If someone tries to argue with me, I'm not going to cave. I'm going to say, I'm sorry, you're wrong. But then I'll just change the subject. Because it's not going to change their mind. And it's just going to drain me. Uncle Joe, I would just say, many of us have a relative, a neighbor, a colleague, a friend. I say, I love you, I'm sorry, you're wrong. Now let's talk about something else. Because I'm not going to change Uncle Joe's mind. In fact, my definition of somebody who's dismissive, the 10 or 11%, it bounces up and down from 9 to 11% per year. My definition of somebody who's dismissive is somebody who, if an angel from God with brand new tablets of stone saying global warming is real on them, and foot-high letters of flame appeared to Uncle Joe, that wouldn't change his mind. So who am I to think I can change his mind? But we don't need the 10%. We just need everybody else. So what do we need to do? We need to share the good news of climate action. And it turns out that scientists are okay, but we're not the best messengers. The science says that people we know are the best messengers. So if you know someone, you're a better messenger to them than I am. That's what the science says. And if you don't know what to say, I have you covered, because if you want to have a conversation about why climate change matters and what we can do to fix it, every single week I have a free newsletter. You can subscribe on email, that's the QR code. You can subscribe on Substack, that's the link there. You can subscribe on Instagram and Threads and LinkedIn. You can see I'm a big believer in replication. And every single week, I share good news of a climate solution that's happening somewhere around the world. How South Korea has virtually eliminated all their food waste. How Pakistan has more solar energy that they installed in 1 year than Canada has in its entire history. Good news for next week is how China's carbon emissions have peaked, and they're starting to go down. There's good news all around us. Then I share not so good news about something that relates to us, not about polar bears and ice sheets, but about something about how climate change is affecting fertility rates. That was last week. Or bananas the week before. Things that we care about, kids' sports. And then every single week I have something that we can do. Every week, good news, not so good news, and something we can do. So you have no excuse. I have talking points for you every single week. All right, so I'm going to leave these questions open. I just have about 5 more minutes here, and then Calvin's going to come up, and we are going to take a few of your questions. So as we go along, as I finish up here, you can put in a question at any point. Let's just make sure those questions are actually open. Yep. And the fun part is you can upvote other people's questions. It's anonymous. So go ahead and do that as it occurs to you. But here's what I want to conclude with. What do we need to do? We have to take everything we know in our head and connect it to why it matters in our heart, and then what we can do with our hands. That's what we need to do. That is the secret formula to catalyzing climate action. So we can talk about why we care about climate change. I care because I'm a scientist, because I'm a mother, because I'm from Canada, because I live in Texas, because I ski, which means you need snow for skiing, and I care because I'm a Christian. Now, I haven't talked much about why I care because I'm a Christian, but I'm really convinced, we do have to turn off our ringers, that caring about God's creation, which includes people and other living things that are already being affected by climate change today, it's a genuine expression of our faith. It's a faithful acceptance of our responsibility, and it's an expression of God's love. If we take the Bible seriously, I think we'll be at the front of the line demanding climate action. All the way from Genesis to Revelation, it's very clear. So this past fall, I had the chance to speak to 10,000 evangelical leaders at the Lausanne Congress. And if you want to listen to my talk, there's the QR code. I told you we were being super high-tech today. There's QR codes everywhere. So if you're interested in listening to my talk, that's the QR code of my talk. And it gets a lot more into why, as Christians, this matters to us as a justice issue, as a poverty issue, as an issue of love for people and all living things. And then I followed up with an article for their leadership magazine. If all else fails, just take a picture of this, right? And then you can look at it later. I followed up with an article for their leadership magazine where I shared what churches can do and how churches can really have an impact on people's lives, on the community, and on the place where they are. So now over to you. If I asked you, why do you care? Why do you care? If the only thing that counts is when our faith expresses itself through love, what would you say when someone says, I care about climate change because I'm a what? Like I said, I could answer it, I'm a scientist. I could answer it, I'm a mother. I could answer it based on what I live or what I enjoy doing. Oh, I like that one. I'm an earthling, yes. And that applies to all of us. The point here is that does everybody have to be a hiker to care about climate change? No. Does everybody have to be a birder to care about climate change? No. Does everybody have to be a parent? No. Does everybody have to be a neighbor? No. Whoever you already are is the perfect person to care. And whoever someone else is already the perfect person to care. So are you trying to make someone else a hiker to make them care about climate change? No. You just have to figure out who they already are that makes them the right person to care. Isn't that interesting? Because to care about climate change, you don't have to be a certain type of person. You just have to be a human living on this planet. So this is the last thing I want you to know. If you're worried, you're not alone. You're having a rational response to what's happening. Worry is good if you know what to do. And the last one is really important. We can't do this alone, but we can together. And I feel like that speaks very beautifully to the image of the church as a body, that everybody is a different part, but we all work together to get something done. And so I love just reminding myself and reminding others that there are entire countries on board with this effort already. There are entire cities on board with this effort. I myself have worked with Houston and Chicago and many others. There are many people in your state who are on board with climate action. There's companies of all kinds, shoe companies, carpet companies, and of course computer companies too who are on board. There's universities and colleges and college networks and classes that are all on board. I could have filled this whole slide just with UC Berkeley, but I want it to be more generic. I work with the Nature Conservancy. We work in 80 countries and 50 states around the world. And in every state and every country, we're working on making nature more resilient, investing in people, food, and water, helping to make our energy cleaner and greener. And here in California, that includes looking at fire, protecting kelp forests, even using nature to help people become more resilient as insurance costs skyrocket. There's so much good news going on. And there's good news going on with churches too. Yes, that's a good headline, isn't it? Really, when you look at who's on board, almost every type of group you can imagine. There's hairdressers who are having conversations with people about climate change. There's warrior moms, there's doctors in medical schools, there's the knitting nanas, one of my favorite groups. They have knit-ins. We often think of climate change, climate action as this giant boulder sitting at the top of a cliff with just a few hands on it. Maybe even this is just Greta in this picture. But when we start looking around, we realize there's millions of hands on the boulder. And if I add mine and you add yours and we use our voice to encourage others to add theirs, that boulder will be going down the hill faster and faster. Change in the past never began with the King of England deciding to end slavery, or the president saying, oh, women should really get the vote, it's Friday. Or the National Party of South Africa opting to end apartheid. When the last IPCC report came out, I wrote this essay for Time magazine. They asked me, where do you find hope? And I said, I realized that in history, hope began when ordinary people of no particular power, wealth, or fame decided the world could and should be different. We know a few of their names, but there were so many others whose names we don't know. But they were people who had the courage of their convictions, who used their voices to advocate for the systemic societal changes needed. We are the people who changed the world before, and that's why I'm convinced that we're the people who can change it again. And now you know how to start. We just have to start with our voice, because what's at stake is everything. So last question to you, before Calvin and I take a few questions from you. Last question for you. Now, when I say climate change, how do you feel? How do you feel about it? Excellent. I like that. Ooh, and then informed. That's a good one, too. Informed is good. Determined. Terrified is rational. That is a rational response. Activated, empowered. You're not alone. Remember the first thing? How many people around the world are worried about climate change? The vast majority are worried, but we don't know what to do. And when those Yale researchers who found that 8% were worried, only 8% were activated, they asked all the people who were worried but not activated, they said, why are you not activated? And you know what they said? They said, number one, I don't know what to do. And they said, number two, no one ever asked me. So what can you do? Tell people what to do and ask them to take action. All right, thank you very much. And now we are going to take some of your questions. Calvin, come on up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Is this on?
I don't think so. This is on, right? Yes.
Check.
Nope.
Don't get it in a moment.
He'll get it for you. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel like, I don't know anyone else here, but I feel like I went through an emotional roller coaster there. So thank you for guiding us and shepherding us through. One of the questions I'm seeing kind of pop up right now is for those who are having the conversation, who are talking with friends and family, what are personal lifestyle choices that people can make or actionable daily things that you would recommend if they're having those conversations?
Yes. So the most important things we can do, and I have this pinned to the top of all my social media accounts that you can pin anything, is number one, have a conversation. Number two, join a climate action group to help amplify your voice. Number three, have the conversation where you work or where you go to school or where you worship. You're seeing a pattern here. Number four, speak with your money. Not just what you buy and what you don't buy, but also where you invest your money. Even $1,000 in a bank that invests in fossil fuels produces the equivalent carbon emissions of flying from here to New York every year. Use your voice with your elected officials. 99.9% of elected officials are not federal, and they have a lot more decision-making power for faster decisions at the county, at the state, at the city, and the regional level. And politicians across the country say that they don't think their constituents care about climate change. Why not? You can probably guess, right? Because they don't hear from them. And then the last most important thing we can do is make changes in our personal life and make them contagious by talking about them. So in our personal life, there's so many things we can do. And in my newsletter, I have a different example every week. So 52 examples every year. And there's many changes we can make in terms of how we get our energy, and what we eat, how we travel, what we do with our waste. But remember, the point is to make those changes contagious by talking about them. So there's not a one-size-fits-all, but my best advice is do something, anything, and then talk about it. Show people that change really is possible.
how would you recommend people talk about it with their churches? So if there are congregations that maybe have not taken steps towards even talking about climate change, what's happening in our world, and maybe don't know how to start that conversation either with their pastor or their church, what would you recommend?
So this is a great question because it's a specific answer to a general question is how do you begin a conversation with X? Always begin with what you have in common, not what divides you. So always begin with what you share, what you both believe in, what you both prioritize. And with a church, there's so many great books you can bring in to do an adult study on. There's so many great video series. I did one with Tear Fund, which is an organization that works in some of the poorest countries in the world. We did a video series for churches. And within 1 year, 150 Scottish churches had used this little video series that we did with Tear Fund. And every single one of them said, we never thought this mattered to us, but now we know it does. What's next? So just starting the conversation by saying, here's a resource, could we use this? Or here's an organization that works in this area, could we have someone come in and talk to us about this? Or I've heard that doing an energy audit of our building is a great way to save money and carbon. I've heard of this organization that does that. Maybe we could do this. It's always a great idea to say, oh, here's an organization or church that's doing this. Maybe we could try that too. So look for something that fits with your church. Again, there's no one size fits all. The important thing is to do something, anything, and talk about it.
There's one question here that I want to lift up. We may have a young Greta here, but someone's asked, what can I do as an 11-year-old?
Oh my gosh. You are already so good at doing things that adults aren't. For example, let me just say, I really suck at TikTok. That is just not my medium of choice. Whereas my son is just a little bit older than you, but he just like on vacation gets on TikTok just for fun and gets like 1 million views on some video he just tossed off like that. So each of us has a voice, and I feel these days, the younger you are, the better you are using your voice or knowing how to use it. So there's a kid in Toronto, where I'm from, called Robert, and I think he's 11 now. I met him when he was 8. He has a YouTube series called Children's Climate Champions, and he interviews people about climate change and puts it on YouTube. And it's phenomenal. I have this little series myself on YouTube called Global Weirding. You now know why it's called Global Weirding. And I did an episode called, each episode answers frequently asked questions. And one of the episodes was, I'm just a kid, what can I do? And I started to research all the things kids have done. And oh my goodness, like I could have had an entire video series just on what kids have done. I mean, what kids have done so far exceeds what most adults have done that it really sets an example of what we could be doing in terms of using our voice, everything from like creating $5 inventions that will charge your phone using solar and wind energy, to serving on committees, or to convincing the school to paint the roof white and open the windows and dispose of food waste and save $30,000 by doing so. I mean, the stuff that's going on is just absolutely amazing. And I should add, at the other end of the spectrum, grandparents and great-grandparents are also doing amazing things too. Bill McKibben has a great group called Third Act. In Switzerland, a group of senior women took Switzerland to the Human Rights Court of Europe and won their case because women and older people are disproportionately impacted by extreme heat. And they said that their country was not keeping them safe and was violating their human rights. So across the entire spectrum, there's action happening. It's just incredible. Wow. Yeah.
Could you speak to maybe some people here who feel activated and also still feel hopeless? Mm-hmm. What is a realistic hope that we will be able to save us, all of us?
Well, unfortunately, we can't save all of us because every day people are dying from climate impacts already. But we know that, and this is what the science says, every bit of warming we prevent makes a difference. Everything we do does make a difference in someone's life. We'll probably never meet that person, but there is someone who is having a better life because of the choices that you made. And that's really what drives me, is the knowledge that we can make a difference, and that's a way to show love to others. But when it comes to hope, though, we often think of hope as that something that will come to us. I have some news for you. It won't. you have to hunt hope down. You have to practice it like an Olympic sport. And it is not easy because everything around us is aimed at making us hopeless. Remember what I said about that study found about doom and gloom messages? What did doom and gloom messages get? They get the most clicks and shares online. So what do for-profit news media, what do they want to share? They want to share bad news because they get the clicks, right? If it bleeds, it leads. So we're surrounded by this ecosystem of bad news because that gets our attention. If you want hope, you have to go find it. You have to look for the stories, and that's part of why I have my newsletter, Talking Climate, to share those stories. You have to find those stories, and you have to share those stories to show other people that there's hope too. Because what is hope? Hope is not a nice feeling that everything will be okay. Hope, theology and psychology agrees, hope begins with recognizing that things are not okay. In fact, in Romans, Paul begins his definition of hope with suffering. And he says, suffering leads to perseverance. Perseverance leads to character. Character leads to hope, which ultimately will not disappoint only because we've placed it in God, not in a specific politician or piece of legislation or even an action that we're doing ourselves. So hope begins with recognizing it's bad. It's getting worse. A better future is possible, but not guaranteed. But there's a path from where we are today to that better future, and there's something I can do to move ourselves along that path. That, I think, is the definition of hope.
Thank you. Thank you. Last question. Where have you found hope just this week? Right? Where have you hunted for hope and discovered it?
Yes. I love that question. So I find hope, and really this is where we as humans find hope, in realizing that we are not alone, that there's many other people pushing that giant boulder, and when I need to take a break, it's okay, because there's other people who have it. So I find hope in hearing from surprising people that action is happening. I find hope from seeing another neighbor bought a plug-in car or got solar panels. I find hope from the big news, like I said, that China's emissions have peaked and they've started to go down, which is amazing. I find hope from the fact that even though the US has withdrawn from the Paris Agreement, cities, states, companies, tribal nations, universities, and organizations representing almost 3/4 of US emissions are still in. That is incredibly hopeful. I find hope in my last newsletter. It turns out that mothers are a powerful force for climate action. And research shows that the number of parent groups for climate action around the world are growing the fastest of any other type of group. That was pretty cool. So I go out and I find this hope and I share it every week in my newsletter. And of course, I'm worried. And of course, I have some days where I'm like, why am I even doing this? And I have some days where I'm like, you know what? I have to just shut down the computer and go outside or go bake something or go just spend some time with my family. We can't carry this burden alone, and we can't carry it all the time. But I find great comfort in the fact that the Bible tells us that God has created the good works that we are to walk in advance. So it's not up to me to save the world. It's not up to you to save the world. It's not up to you to even save the people who are sitting in the pew with you. It's up to each of us just to do what each of us can contribute, which is unique and different from what anyone else can do. And remember my last point. So remember, what's the first point? The first point is you're not alone. The second one is if you're worried, that's a rational response. The third one is worry is good only if you know what to do about it. And then the last point is we can't fix it alone, but we can fix it together. So ultimately, that is where I find hope, is by working together with others.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing. Can we give one more round of applause to Dr. Katharine Hayoe?